Hi everyone, my name is Nathalie Miebach and I am the teacher of a workshop called Going Off the Wall, Playful Thinking in 3D, which will be offered through Art New England at Massachusetts College of Art, July 11th through the 17th. This is an online course. My goal with this video is to tell you a little bit more about the course, tell you a little bit about myself as an artist, and introduce you to some of the techniques that you will be learning in this workshop. So let's start with me. I'm here in my studio, so welcome in my studio. I'm at 450 Harris Ave. I've been in the studio for over 15 years now. And I've been weaving for over 20 years. I learned from a local weaver, Lois Russell, who is an incredible basket weaver. And the way she taught me is pretty much how I teach. The way she taught us was she would teach us how to start something, and then she would ask us to problem solve our way to the end. And that's very much the approach that I've taken with weaving throughout my career as an artist and as a teacher, because I want you to discover the possibilities in these weaves. So everybody in the workshop everybody builds a very different body of work, because every one of you will problem solve your way towards a different kind of solution. So I've been using basket weaving techniques for over 20 years to translate scientific data into woven sculptures. And I would say that the data and sculpture and basket weaving have always been intertwined in my mind as an artist from the very beginning. But what I didn't anticipate as I was beginning to use basket weaving as a way of trying to understand science through a tactile medium was how much I would appreciate and love and fall in love with these basket weaving techniques, because to me they're all about engineering, they're all about problem solving, and they're all about play. So there's so much you can do with these techniques. So let me jump right into them. So I brought with me lots and lots of baskets that if I kind of tip down, you'll see I have all these different baskets that I'm going to be sharing with you in just a minute. And one thing I really love about baskets is that they're incredibly resilient. Baskets are very, very old. It is thought that the first baskets appeared with the onset of agriculture, but really they probably appeared way earlier as well. Almost every human culture and many animal cultures, or many animals, develop weaving techniques for survival. So weaving is all about survival. And what's really remarkable about these techniques is that even though they're thousands of years old, they really haven't changed much. They're incredibly resilient. And the reason they're so resilient is they're very, very adaptable. So even though the materials have changed, the cultural context or even the environmental contexts through which the material has been harvested or is available, the way that objects, the function of objects, or the way that we interpret objects has changed, all of that may be so, but the techniques themselves have remained pretty much the same. So what you're learning is very much what somebody would have used thousands of years ago to build something to help them survive. So let me kind of run through some of the techniques that we'll be learning about. So let me start with this most basic one. There aren't that many different techniques. There's really only 4. This one is one that you might be familiar with. This is called the random weave. It looks very much like a nest. And the random weave is really a weave that goes diagonals that are going in and out and in and out. It's called the random weave, which I think is somewhat unfortunate because there's nothing random about it. It is a very much a going in and out and in and out in a diagonal way. I also think of it very much as a 3D drawing. It's almost like you're drawing, you're creating a 3D drawing. What's remarkable about the random weave is how incredibly strong they are. So I'm pushing this basket right now and it's really, really resisting it. One thing that's really wonderful about basket weaving is that it is very much about your hands and tension and structure. And I often say that learning how to weave is teaching your hands how to listen. Your eyes are helpful, but it's really your hands that are doing all of the work. Weaving is just as much about technique as it is about your body and how you're using the body to knead and form the piece. So that's another thing that's really interesting about weaving baskets, is that it's not just about weaving, it's also about kneading and putting pressure and using your body to form the piece. An example of that would be another technique here, which is called twining. So twining has a very different logic from the random weave. It is now, we're dealing with vertical elements and horizontal elements. And this shape here that I'm sharing here with you is both a result of using the technique and keeping a consistency between the distance of the different spokes that you're using, but also shaping it so it's as much kneading as it is weaving. Twining has vertical elements and horizontal elements and is a technique that's very, very widespread. So this is one of the techniques that you would be learning in this workshop. This is using a material called fiber rush, which is twisted paper that we would be using. Another example of twining is here, for example, you can make twining, you can use twining techniques with all sorts of materials. Here is one that's using paper, and when you put pressure on it, again, you can see the resistance is pretty strong. But you can use the same thing with something like yarn, and you'll see it's much, much more flexible. So there's this wonderful thing about these weaving techniques is that you can change the flexibility of the techniques very easily by changing the materials, or even by loosening the way that you're actually weaving it, loosening the way that you're tightening each turn and so forth. Here's another example of twining. I love very simple objects that you can find everywhere, because one of the most important things that you'll learn in this workshop is not just knowing how to weave, but learning how to read the objects. These objects are going to be around you your entire life, and once you know how to weave, you know how to read them. So for example, this is a duck, and unlike this piece where you have one beginning, which is most of the time when you see this kind of coming together of spokes in this kind of crisscross fashion that tells you that this is where the basket started, but you have a piece like this, and you can notice that there's lots of different pieces here that are coming together. You have the bottom basket, you have the wings that are separate, and then you have the top. So this is actually a basket woven with four different components, excuse me. Here is another example of twining where you begin actually with a solid object. So you begin with a piece of wood that's been spliced so that those pieces of wood become spokes, and then you fill it in with bamboo. So working with solid objects, starting off with a solid object is another possibility. So twining is a really great technique. It's very versatile. You can use it with lots and lots of different materials. Another technique that is also very common that you may have seen is called coiling. Coiling is a kind of wrapping where you have an inner element. In this case, it's seagrass and a rush, and then you have an active element, which is the thing that sort of binds all of the inner elements together and attaches it through stitches to the other coils. So this is coiling. And coiling can also look much more like this rather than a sort of roundish beginning. You can have a much more organic kind of look to it as well. Another technique that we will certainly be doing in this class is called plaiting. And plaiting is really flat weavers that are crisscrossed together in some vertical and horizontal configuration. So one thing that's nice about plaiting is that you can make nice designs with it, but you can also create really interesting shapes and forms with it. It's a very sculptural technique, and I think of it as sort of the Lego technique of them all, because it's essentially based on the grid. You can use this grid to attach and build further and further onto it. So you start off with one form, but then you can kind of add to 20, 30 more different forms. So these are all interconnected with each other. Another technique, that we'll be learning is something called the Hexagon Weave, which is one of my favorites. So the Hexagon Weave is a version of plaiting in that it also uses flat elements, but it is configured in the form of a hexagon. So if you look closely, you'll see there's a negative space hexagon in the middle, in each of these middle where these 6 weavers are coming together. It's a very structurally sound weave. It's used a lot in architecture and furniture design because it's so structurally sound. But it's also a technique that you can do lots of really interesting things with in 2D. And so that's been what I've been working on during the pandemic, is using the hexagon weave to create different patterns. So these are all, believe it or not, based on the hexagon, but you're creating very, very different kind of patterns. And I just love the versatility of this, that you can, this is watercolor paper that's been painted on both sides and then woven together. Or here's another basket. Same technique, but then different colors, and it looks very different on that side. So kind of a fun way to explore these techniques. Everything that you're learning in this class can be used for 2D or 3D exploration. So it doesn't have to turn into a sculpture. It can certainly turn into something that's 2D that you will be interested in. So let me tell you a little bit about the workshop. The workshop has two main goals. The first one is to teach you three-dimensional weaving techniques. And you can apply those techniques to whatever interest you have, whether that's sculpture or design or architecture or printmaking or painting or whatever it is. They are meant to be very, very flexible. And I've been teaching this for over 15 years, and I've seen so many different things that students have done. So there's really, they're very, very applicable to lots of different interests and disciplines. And so one of my goals is to teach you techniques, the basics of the techniques, so that you understand what is the foundation, what's the basic rules that govern these techniques. And once you know the basic rules, then you can run with it and do whatever you want with it. So the workshop is very technique heavy. And the techniques will be taught through live demos, through videos, pre-recorded videos, as well as PDFs. And these are all the videos, and the PDFs are going to be in a folder for you, so that if you'll see the live demo, but if you can always go back and relook at the videos or the PDFs to get another kind of round of or another articulation of the techniques. The first 3 days of the workshop are going to be focused each on one different technique. So we'll start off with twining, then we'll go on to plaiting, and then we'll go on to the hexagon weave. And so they're going to be pretty technique heavy, and then you'll have the last 2 days to just really play with it on your own. Every technique will be reinforced in the afternoon through a slide presentation where I will show you images of different applications of these techniques in different artistic or non-artistic disciplines, so you can get a sense of how they've been applied in different contexts and scales and different materials. The other goal of the workshop, and it's in some ways the harder one, is to infuse a sense of play in all the learning that you're doing. So the workshop is about learning new techniques, but it's also about ripping us out of these expectations of what we want these weaves to look like, or ripping us out of overthinking something and constantly reaching for the same types of colors when we're painting paper. So infused in every one of these techniques and every day will be these challenges to kind of help you not overthink something and just really have an open mind and play with it, because play to me is a form of thinking, and play also requires us to be very open to what the outcome might be. The reason I say it's difficult is because I find actually that bringing about this sense of play is not easy, because it does force you to have an open mind of what the outcome might be. And failing and taking risk is an essential part of that journey. So what I would love you to do is to approach this workshop in the mindset of a tinker, of somebody who's just learning something new with no outcome in mind, because I think that's where the real discoveries come about. So those are the two main goals: teach you techniques and infuse in everything we're learning a kind of play, a sense of play, a sense of discovery. The schedule is structured in a way that will hopefully lessen Zoom fatigue. I've been teaching online for a year now, and I've also been a student online. So I know that Zoom fatigue is real, and it can really sort of kill any educational experience. And the way that I've been working with that is to make sure that we have some Zoom time, but you also have time where you're off the computer. So the way that the schedule is the way that I'm thinking of doing the schedule, and it's worked pretty well in the past, which is we start off every day with a check-in, and that's when you show us through Zoom what you've been working with. What sort of decisions have you been making? What sort of questions have you been asking yourself? You know, what's been going on? And then I start with teaching you a new technique. I give you a live demo, and then I go over the videos and the PDFs. And then we have this sort of semi-Zoom place where you can turn off the camera and stay with us, or you can stay on Zoom, but we're trying to kind of mimic us being in the classroom at the table, trying to work on these techniques that I've just demoed. So some people will be on, some people will be off, but most of you will not be looking at the computer at all, but you'll be looking at what you just learned. Then we have lunch, and after lunch, it is studio time, where I will be available on Zoom for whoever wants me, who wants to talk to me and have a one-on-one with me over Zoom. I'm going to be available, but it's essentially the time for you to just work on your own. And then we'll come back together in the late afternoon for some slide presentations and some videos that I want to share with you. And again, just bring up any questions that people have come up with during the course of the day. So the first 3 days will be focused on techniques, and the second day and the fourth and fifth day will be really giving you time to really flesh out the ideas that you've been building along those 3 days. And most of the time that means most students at that point will focus on one or maybe two techniques and just work on those. Materials, we'll do all the demos with paper-based material, but you can work with really any kind of material that you want to. So one thing I really encourage you is to bring every little bit of material that you've always wanted to work with but never really had an excuse to, and bring it in. So not just materials that you think you can weave with, but found objects can be really fun to work with and to integrate. If you're a painter, bring in your paintings. If you're a printmaker, bring in your prints. You know, bring in what fuels you as an artist is just as important as having a ton of material. So materials isn't just, you know, literally materials, but I also think of materials as objects or things that really inspire us, and those can become part of your pieces. The class tends to bring in beginners and seasoned weavers, and so one of the first things I try to do is once I have the final roster, I send everyone a letter asking what is your skill level in terms of these different techniques, and based on your replies and based on your interest as to why you're taking this course to begin with, I then tweak the presentations and I then tweak the demos to adjust to different skill levels. That's been a pretty good and effective way of working with different skill levels. So this is definitely a class for beginners. Sometimes if you've never done any 3D work ever, this is a great way to jump into it, because it's so tactile. It requires you to use your body in a way to really understand how you can build tension, how you can build form in space through the manipulation of material. Or if you have already been weaving for 15 years and you just sort of want to have a fresh look, or you want to just kind of see another way of approaching the technique that you've never done before, this is a great class for you. So it's really a class that can be adjusted to many different skill levels. So I think that's all I'm going to be sharing with you today. If you have any questions, please reach out and email me. The best way to email me is on my Hotmail, which is N and then underscore and then Miebach, Miebach @hotmail.com, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. My website is NathalieMiebach.com. It's NathalieMiebach. So I hope to see you in just a few weeks, July 11th through the 17th, going off the wall, Playful Thinking in 3D, and any questions you have, please reach out, and I look forward to meeting you all. Bye, everyone.